We are so happy for all of you to be here for our office hours. We are preparing for the 2023 Resource Tracking Report and are happy to discuss the submission of data and how and a little bit more background about the report itself. Like I said, we'll be doing background about the report, how we collect data, answering some more frequently asked questions, anything specific you might want to know, and then we'll have particular breakout time where we'll stop the recording again, just have kind of one-on-one conversations. Okay, so great. To get us started, what is the Resource Tracking Report? So the Resource Tracking Report is the foundational research product that has been developed and published by funders for LGBTQ issues for more than 20 years. It is a core component of our organization's research portfolio, and it tracks philanthropic support for LGBTQ communities and causes by US-based foundations. This report not only provides a snapshot of funding for queer communities and issues across the country, it also reveals gaps and highlights opportunities for US-based foundations to make really strategic funding decisions within the current philanthropic and political landscape, which we recognize are shifting all of the time. So we really are grateful for the Resource Tracking Report as a resource to help all of us understand about what the scope of LGBTQ philanthropy looks like at any given moment. And the project continues to evolve to more accurately capture the state of US foundation funding for domestic LGBTQ communities and causes. And we want to be as timely and responsive to those shifts within the sector, within the communities that we are all interested in serving, as well as broader social justice movements, so that we are all aligned kind of across sectors. And so here is just a little bit of background about our methodology. So what is our methodology? The data presented in the Resource Tracking Report reflects our updated approach to grant reporting, which has been developed in partnership with some of our research partners. We work with a consulting firm called Strength in Numbers Consulting Group. They're an LGBTQ-led research firm, and they have deep expertise in philanthropic strategy and evaluation. Our approach to the Resource Tracking Report is guided by our shared commitment to sustainability, to transparency, and to long-term longevity and durability of the methodology, so that we can have really consistent research protocols that can grow with our organization and then respond again to the evolving needs of the philanthropic sector and LGBTQ communities across the country. As we all know, threats to LGBTQ communities are increasing all of the time across the country, including through a rise in legislation that is intended to block access to gender-affirming care for trans youth. And there is always very strong stigma, discrimination, and violence against LGBTQ people and their families. So we regularly review our report's methodology so that we can really offer a detailed analysis of foundation funding to support our communities and causes. Importantly, and Alyssa will go into this in a bit more details shortly, but our Resource Tracking Report includes grants focused in the United States, and grants focused outside the United States are shared with our partners at the Global Philanthropy Project. And they include international grant making in their report, which is called the Global Resources Report. GPP publishes a version of this report. They published the last version past June, covering calendar years 2021 and 2022. And the next report will be published in 2026 and will cover global data from calendar years 2023 and 2024. Here at Funders for LGBTQ Issues, our report comes out annually, and the current report we're working on covers calendar year 2023. And so, how do we collect LGBTQ grant data? We collect data to develop our resource tracking reports in two primary ways. Through the direct call for data submissions every September, the purpose of this call today, and we collect these data through the LGBTQ grants data submission template spreadsheet that Alyssa will walk through shortly, and it's the focus of our session today. We also download tax form 990 data from the IRS website. However, inclusion of 990 data depends on the speed that we are allowed, that the speed of data that are submitted to the IRS. and then how the IRS processes those data and makes them available publicly. So the 990 piece is a bit more time dependent and dependent on external factors. And so what is the data submission process? First, the primary form of data collection that I mentioned through the data submission from foundations like yours, it is incredibly important because it is the primary way that we collect high quality and detailed data that are needed in order to produce the annual resource tracking report. And we have designed this template to collect these data based on feedback from foundations like yours and other research partners that we have been working with for more than 20 years. And so we include information about this on our webpage. We are happy to share the link in the chat if you have not seen it before. We have a brand new research landing page on our website, which we're really very excited about because it provides more information about our methodologies, about our approach to research at funders for LGBTQ issues, and currently includes information about the call for data to be submitted. We are requesting the data be submitted to us through our research email address included here on the slide by Tuesday, October 15th, so that we can review the data and ask any follow-up questions of folks via emails that we have a bit more time. So I'm also happy to hand it to Alyssa at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next thing we're going to go do is actually go through the data submission template, which is available on our website, following that link that we posted in chat. So I will share my screen and, can you stop? Yes, thank you. I will share my screen so that we can sort of walk through the template together. Once you download this Excel file from the webpage, it will look like this. It has 4 tabs. The first one is instructions, which are, basically what we have on the webpage and some more detailed information about the type of grants we're looking for and an overview of the type of information that we ask for each grant. So when we are asking for your grants data, there is a quick description on that page, but you can scroll down on the instructions and see sort of what it is that we actually want, why we want it, and sort of how highly prioritized it is in our data collection process. We really appreciate all the information that you're willing to provide, but there are only a few fields such as grantee name, grant amount, and type of support that are mandatory for inclusion in reporting. And that's just so that we are able to confirm that these are sort of LGBTQ grants and eligible to be included in our report. I will say that for grantee name, we are totally happy if you just tell us that the grantee is anonymous. That's fine. We just need something in that field. So the second tab in our data submission template is funder information, just some basic information about y'all, your institution. So contact information, which is important for us as we go through subsequent years for data collection. If we have the right point of contact, it makes it much easier for us and for you. So that is the big thing on this page. The other thing that we ask for that's really important is whether 100% of your grant making is LGBTQ specific, because we need to clear grants as, like I said, as being LGBTQ enough to include in our reporting. So if you tell us that all your grants are LGBTQ specific, then even if that's not immediately obvious from the individual level grants, we will know based on this that we can include them in our reporting. The next tab that we have is for US grant making, and this is where we are really focused this year. It includes the US as well as US territories, Puerto Rico, Guam, etc. We have the whole list on the first page. So it's basically we ask you to fill out 1 row per grant. And we are collecting data on LGBTQ focus grants awarded in calendar year 2023. We ask for information about the grantee, so information about their name, their mission, and then we ask about the grant itself. So like I said, grant amount mandatory. Obviously, we're reporting on the amount granted to LGBTQ folks and issues. And then the high priority fields that we ask for give us more detail to report on the funding landscape so that we are able to sort of do these sub-analyses that are really useful in our report. So things like what LGBTQ issues are being addressed, or what specific subpopulations of the LGBTQ community are being funded. We also have, so we have, year awarded, grant duration, grant description, some geographic information so that we can do sort of by state and by region breakdowns of funding. The type of support, is it general operating support? Is it program support? Is it capacity building? And then we have a bunch of columns that are sort of drop down yes, no columns asking about the population that the grant is supporting. So is it supporting the LGBTQ community general? Is it supporting trans, gender nonconforming, non-binary people, queer women, etc.? And that is a really easy, using those columns is a really easy way to ensure that your grant making is counted in our reporting, especially if the grant description that you have doesn't make it clear that the grant is LGBTQ focused. So if, in your grant making database, the only sort of description you have is that this is general operating support, we won't necessarily be able to know that it is generally operating support to an organization that supports queer folks. But if you choose one of these drop-down columns, then we will know, and we will be able to include it in our reporting. The next tab is non-US grant making. So as Sammy said, our report only covers grant making that is focused on the US and US territories, but we do share any data that comes to us that is international with the Global Philanthropy Project for their Global Resources Report. So if it's easier for you to send everything to us every year, rather than sending one thing to us this year and then something separate to GPP for this year and next year, that's fine. We'll send it on to them. We are in very close contact, just whatever is easiest for y'all. The other thing to note really for this tab is it is very similar to the US grant making tab, but if you have a grant that crosses over between the US and another country, we ask that you include it in this non-US grant making tab. And then we have a field asking about crossover grants. So if you have a grant that is supporting folks in the US and Mexico, for example, we ask that you indicate it in this field about crossover grants. And then we ask that you can tell us sort of how much of the work you sort of think is for folks based in the US versus folks based internationally, so that we're able to separate out that money for reporting both in our grant making and for GPP reporting in their grant making. And that is the template broadly. It looks like a lot of fields, but it's all super important information for us, and hopefully a lot of it is information you already collect. If it is something that you don't and that is not required, that's totally fine. We appreciate whatever you can give us. And B, I see your comment, the 50% question is the place that makes it difficult to determine for our org. And yeah, we are very aware of that. And actually, if we want to go to the FAQ slide, Sammy, that is our sort of first FAQ is this grant LGBTQ enough? And so we write out that 50% as a way to describe like this grant is intentionally aimed at LGBTQ communities and issues. If you don't know the exact percentage, but your intent in the grant making was to support LGBTQ folks or support LGBTQ issues, then I think that counts. What we're trying to do is make sure that it's not like a laundry list of communities supported by your grant making, so that we're not just having LGBTQ folks sort of wrapped up in things. So we know that, trans and LGBTQ folks are just proportionately affected by homelessness, but every grant for homelessness is not necessarily intended to sort of target LGBTQ folks. So we're trying to make that distinction between intention versus like just happening to be encompassed in another population. And so that's why we use that 50% marker. But if you can think about sort of your grant making and how y'all are thinking about it, That is the sort of main point of that question. And so to be included in the report, it's either like one, that you indicated in that funder information sheet that all your grant making is LGBTQ specific. Two, that the specific grant entry indicates an LGBTQ focus either through the grant description itself or the information about the grantee itself, or through those drop-down columns that I showed you earlier, or that the grant is awarded to an LGBTQ specific organization. So we could see if you include a mission in a grantee mission and we can see that it is a LGBTQ organization, then great, it's an LGBTQ grant. The next question that we have is about data privacy and security, especially in the current political environment. It's really important that we take into account both your privacy and security and the privacy and security of your grantees. So we have written up a new data security policy on our website, which Sammy just dropped the link into, and you can also see on this slide, that we hope, we think is a good basis for keeping your data safe. And then the last question is, what about grant maker and grantee privacy? And so we use data anonymization methods like masking, using pseudonyms, and aggregation. So we don't report ever on the specific funding relationships between grant makers and grantees. Grant makers can request anonymization of their data at the time of submission or by just directly emailing us, calling us, talking to us. So if you want either all your grantees to be anonymous and or just your organization to be not named in the reporting, we can accommodate that. The other thing, like I said, we don't publish or share information about specific funding relationships, either in the resource tracking report or in any data sharing with third parties. So we have some partner relationships with other foundations where they're interested in, for example, funding in, Florida specifically. We would not share the grant maker and grantee relationships. In Florida, we would just share like, here are some grant makers that are working in the state and here are some grantees that are working in the state, but without those relationships intact. And then we would share sort of aggregate data in that way. And again, this is all sort of described in our data security policy. So yeah, those are our biggest FAQs. If you have any other questions, we are happy to answer them. Questions for the group. And if you have any questions that you'd rather ask in a one-on-one room, we will do a sort of breakout after the main group questions, and you can ask those to us privately.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. I really appreciate how you were able to walk through the template. And so are there any questions that anybody has for the good of the group that you would that are fine to be recorded? Perhaps they might be relevant to another foundation, or we can stop the recording here.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
More just a reiteration of what I think I heard you say. So we have many types of people at the intersections. So what I'm hearing you say is 50% or more is a yes, and that's something that's useful to you guys. And if it's not, do I go ahead and still include it in there and just mark no? And then what was the other part of that? As an intermediary funder, I wanted to make sure that we understand where we can, perhaps we're not here yet, but my other big question is, say we brokered a grant for someone and this is their focus, and then just leaving the trail of what does it mean to have brokered this? Where did it come from? Where did it go? What did they do with it? The re-granting of grants as an intermediary funder is the part where I'm like, oh gosh, okay. Does that make sense what I'm kind of like asking? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So on your first question, and Sammy, feel free to jump in. Yes, it's getting especially tricky to sort of identify and define what we're counting as LGBTQ grant making, especially as grant making shifts to be more intersectional. But if the sort of intention beyond your grant and the actual population served is, a decent portion LGBTQ, then yes, please include it. If the intention is more sort of aimed at a group that is inclusive of, but not sort of targeting LGBTQ folks, and you want to include that, but mark it no, then that is all right. It will probably not be included in the tracking report. As far as intermediary funding, we have a column in here for will this grant be further regranted to additional organizations? So the idea would be that you would, put down the organization that you are sort of regranting the money to, and then we know that they are spreading it to other sort of LGBTQ causes. And that some of that money might be going to just supporting their operation as well. But we have a column for that. We love and accept all intermediary data. Hopefully it will be clearer how to sort of work that in the grant submission template when you have a second to look at it yourself and go through it. But we are very open to, if you want to email me or Sammy, and we can set up a meeting to go through that privately as well, if you have any questions, or if you just want to email us a question.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and we also include or exclude regranting in terms of our analyses based on what Alyssa shared. So based on the data that we've received, if it's clear that a certain portion is intended for regranting, then we do our due diligence to make sure we're not double counting. To make sure we're not double counting grants in our final analyses that are presented. So in certain, you will find in our last resource tracking report, which covers calendar year 2022, you will find throughout the report, it indicates whether or not a graphic or a data point includes or excludes regranting. So I would also, just so that you're aware that that is something we are really clear about in our analysis, so we're not double counting anything. Well, those were really great questions. Thank you so much. Is there anyone else that has any kind of group relevant questions, or I'm happy to stop the recording and we could go into breakout rooms if necessary. Yes, Sarah, please.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. I just wanted to confirm we are reporting on amount awarded, because we usually report on payouts, but if it's a large multi-year awarded in 23 full amount. Okay. And then I just wanted to know, since a couple of us will be working on this submission, what have been some of the major shifts or updates to this year's reporting versus what we had to do last year? Are there anything I should flag for the team?
Yeah, our submission template and asks are very similar to what we have asked for, especially last year. I think the only big shift that we have is we have included more of those population columns to sort of mirror what we actually report on in the tracking report itself. So we didn't used to have a column specifically for, is this grant making targeting bisexual populations? But because we report on that in the tracking report, we've added a column for it. But otherwise, if you worked on this last year, it will look very, very almost identical to what you did last year.
And you might also find we wanted to do add some updates to the instructions page, which always had a lot of great information of what information is mandatory versus higher or lower priority. But in the current template, you will find in the examples or definition column, there's a lot more information there about what we really mean by each of the fields. So if you scroll down on the first tab of the spreadsheet, it'll list every single column name and then a very explicit definition and including some examples. So one of the things that we really rely on for us to better understand and be able to code each grant appropriately is we really rely on the grant description itself, because that is usually where we can understand if a grant is supporting kind of LGBTQ folks in addition to additional populations or communities, or if it is for a particular type of program, if it's for capacity building, or if it's for a scholarship or a fellowship, all these other kind of disaggregates that we include and sub-analyses that we include in the report. A lot of that context comes from the grant descriptions. So this year we included some examples in the instructions tab of what some really strong grant descriptions might look like that can help us on the analysis side make sure we're adequately analyzing and coding the grant making that you're doing, because we really want to make sure that our reporting is as accurate as possible so that we can kind of serve the field in that way and be able to best reflect your work. So thank you so much. That was a really great question, Sarah. And welcome, Janet. Thank you so much for being able to join. We're really happy to have you here. We're in the question and answer portion of our session. And we were just going through kind of what are some updates to the layest submission template, what makes a grant LGBTQ enough, et cetera. And so welcome. We'd be happy to have another discussion with you offline if you have a specific question. And yes, it's better to over-include grants made with details, including in the grant description. In other columns, there's a notes and errata column as well, if there's other context you'd like to provide there, so that we can kind of better understand the submission itself. Please, yes, Janet, you asked, how do we handle multi-year grants? In the past, we got a $1 million grant to fund Trevor Project. That was for 3 years. It overstated 1 year and under it. Absolutely. So there's a great question. And is there anything else, any other context you'd like to provide for your question?
No, I do. I joined right in as Allison said, if you did it last year, it hasn't changed very much. I'm like, yay. So that was helpful. The other thing is then you mentioned that, I have no more context for that particular question, but what I struggle with is if we have a donor advised fund holders who just do general operating support grants. And sometimes I know that it might be for something else, but because they didn't actually specify it, I can't add that. I choose not to add that because I don't have the clarity in the purpose statement. And so I've just been talking to my LGBTQ supporters. I'm like, please be specific, and I can add it. Because I think, so we've been struggling with that question, but the multi-year question was the one that I had really.
That's a great question. Yes, we present on total awarded in a given year. So
Okay.
for this particular grant that you mentioned, though it was for 3 years' time, we would count the 1 million at the point that the grant was awarded. And then what we are really interested in doing more analysis on this coming year and in years moving forward is looking at multi-year granting. How many are multi-year grants? What's the average length of grant, et cetera, to be able to kind of estimate how much money might be dispersed over a longer period of time. But historically, the methodology has been designed that we report on total awarded in a given year. And that is a function of recognizing the importance of giving more multi-year grants for higher dollar amounts and recognizing that total at once. And yes, so then that's why you would have seen that total be acknowledged in that way.
Yeah, no, it made sense. And that's the way we report everything here. So it's consistent with how we report. So I just felt bad because it made us look a lot better than normal. And then in other years, it made us look worse than normal. But what are you going to do?
Yes.
I do struggle too, is that, I struggle with grants. I know an organization serves maybe 20% LGBTQ people, but they don't specify it in the purpose. So there's no way to track or count that. And I guess this is a long-standing issue between serving for a need like hunger or mental health, and then serving for a particular population. So I think there's that struggle going on between, because we do make grants to organizations that are also serving LGBTQ, but there's just no way to count that. And so we don't. And so not to say that we're underreporting, because it's woefully underfunded on every metric. So it's not a big deal, but sometimes that's the pushback I get from people who are not as welcoming to the statistic as as we would like them to be. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. We were just discussing kind of what is the threshold by which we recognize that a grant might be inclusive of like a program might be inclusive of queer folks, but not necessarily focused or targeted on serving queer people. And so there is tension there, right? How do we know a grant is LGBTQ enough in order to be included? And again, we would welcome any additional information. Detailed grant descriptions are very helpful for that. If there is an organization, like if the grantee themselves includes LGBTQ specific services or programs and make it clear kind of on their website, we can kind of help triangulate and help determine with you which are LGBTQ enough to be included per our methodology. That's an ongoing question that we continue to have, again, because we don't want to overinflate the numbers. We know that that would be really detrimental to our communities and our issues, but we also want to make sure we are capturing things accurately. Alyssa, is there anything else that you would add there?
No, I think you covered it.
I'm really just learning from Alyssa. Alyssa is the expert in this, and I'm just like, please teach me how we do this. And it's been really wonderful to be able to kind of work together. Since I am new, I can ask similar questions and kind of bring things back to be like, okay, and help me understand what this means in practical terms, since I've only been on the team since March. So this is my first data submission process. So I'm grateful to be here learning alongside all of you.